oh my God, I'm getting killed. Now, I did not say she's a better writer. I did not say she was more innovative. I did not say more transcendent for her time. All I'm saying is that when the woman hits the drums, it sounds better. She's more fluid. She is in the pocket more. She's less on top of the beat than Neil. That's all I'm saying. She's a better drummer.
YouTube is a strange place to ply your wares. Put the microphone on. You heard it though, because this microphone I got is really good. It works at a distance. YouTube is a very strange place to ply your wares. Some of my videos will only do 2,000 views. Some of them can do nearly 200,000 views, although I've never broken the 200,000 view limit. Some videos I do because I'm compelled to do them. Some videos just drop like manna from heaven. And this is one of those, right? I just know it's going to get the views. Okay? There's a lot of people doing videos about Rush at the moment. So the algorithm's all Rush. People are putting in Rush into YouTube all bloody day long. So that means they're going to find this video, but you've got to get in there. And that title and thumbnail's got to be correct. And it came to me this morning. Is Anika better than Neil? Right? That brings down a lot of what this discussion is, and it exposes an underlying stress, which I think is the driver for why these Rush videos they're so successful. If Rush had just come back and Neil Peart was still alive, it would be a different thing. It's Anika being there, right? And something that I have often played on, which is the fact that the Rush fans believe Neil Peart to be the greatest drummer of all time, right? That is being, as an idea, stressed a little bit, isn't it, by the events of this tour. But on the same token, Anika was such a great choice as a drummer, right? Because for a whole bunch of reasons that we're going to explore on this video, actually, the Rush audience do not want to pick on her. Okay? They don't want to say, oh, she didn't do very good. Because in the Rush audience, it's exposing something which could be seen as the back end of the sort of lonely incel type audience that they originally had in the early days. Those little incels have grown up. All right? And they're a certain mindset, these grown-up incels now. And so it's creating a tension within the Rush audience. Now, this video asks a question, doesn't it? It says, is Anika a better drummer than Neil Peart? Right, well, it's all subjective. I've played the drums now for 46 years, nearly 50 years. I know Neil Peart's drumming inside out. I learned everything he did up until about Signals and could play it all. I could have been doing that gig as long as they didn't do anything after Signals, but the rest of it I could probably walk in and do now. So I feel qualified, you know, I've played in a progressive rock band. I feel qualified here to tell you straight in a yes or no whether Anika Nilles is a better drummer than Neil Peart. And the answer is, well, the thing is, I've got adverts to get you to, haven't I? Have we had an advert yet? I've got to bloody make my money somehow. I can't just have this thing, because some of you who aren't interested in the chat, you just want to know what I think. And that's what's brought you here. I wonder what Andy thinks. What does he think? Right? And you don't want to hear, it's all subjective, do you? You don't want to hear that. It's all subjective. But it depends how you measure it. What's your measuring? That's all true. But you don't want that, do you? Right? So let's just get down to it. When it comes to actual skill on the drums, which one, in terms of skill, the ability to play the drums, the measuring a drummer on their ability to play drums, to do things on the drums, right? Who is the best out of Anika and Neil Peart? It's hands down Anika. All day long. She possesses chops, technique, skill that's so inordinately beyond what Neil Peart could do. Right? Now, the Rush fans don't want to hear that. What they want to do is create a situation where they can go, oh, she's so good because she's playing Neil Peart stuff. Right? But the truth is, this is very easy for her to play. And if you go and listen to her music, which I doubt most of you have, but I've been a drummer, I've known Anika Nilles for years. I've been watching her stuff for years. And in terms of odd times and metric modulation and technique and skill, right, there is no way Neil Peart could play Anika's stuff. If it was the other way around, she has more skill than Neil Peart, right? So what I want to do on this video is go through the history of 20th century music that gets us to arrive at this point where the biggest thing going on in music is Rush. Everybody's watching those videos. Even my wife knows about Anika and what's going on. Everybody's seeing this played out. It's a wonderful thing because I love Rush and you love Rush. And Neil Peart is one of the greatest drummers in history. That's the truth. He is one of the absolute greatest drummers in history, right? But he hasn't got as much skill on the drums as Anika. But if you want to know why he's the greatest and why he's a greater drummer than Anika, is because the reason Anika's got that skill is because of Neil Peart. Now that's the introduction over, right? Now do you want to know what happened and why that is? Okay? The drums as an instrument are actually a collection of instruments. The problem that a drummer has is they're having to play multiple instruments at the same time. An orchestral percussionist will be either playing snare drum, utilizing snare drum technique, or playing timpani, utilizing timpani technique, or playing, you know, those ding dong bells, whatever they called. What they called them, tubular bells? Is that what they called? They'll be using a separate technique. Somewhere in America, in New Orleans or in that environment, drummers started to collect these different marching instruments together and started to put them together. So drums suddenly became a problem of coordination. Drumming of that time had a number of purposes. One purpose was obviously marching music, and marching music is to make you feel like marching up and down. So it had a groove feel to it. The drums were there to rally people and make them want to stomp up and down and march, which is aligned to dance. And we see the history of jazz as being marching music morphing into dance music, sort of overtaking the cocktail dance, the waltzes and all that, with this much more ebullient sound, right? But drummers were also working in silent cinema. And in silent cinema, you would have a pianist, playing music, often improvised, trying to, add some sound into there that would colour the emotions. And the drummer would be adding not only rhythms to what the music was going on, but they would be supplying sound effects. And this, as you imagine, is one of those things where, one hand's waggling the sheet for the thing and the other one's doing the click-clocky horsey as well, so you're doing the bass drum to go with the music. So this coordination feeds into the history of silent film, and these people who were manipulating contraptions, sound contraptions. In America, for a while, the drums were called traps, which is short for contraptions. These drummers were also working in early jazz. Drummers have always had the thing of having to do multiple things at the same time. And when we see the history of jazz, we see the idea that what you can do gets more and more complex as time goes on. Now, the early drummers like Baby Dodds, who had come out of that silent cinema realm, were incredible drummers, but their chops would have been like snare drum technique and being able to get sounds out of the drums themselves. If you watch the very rare footage we have of Baby Dots, you'll see he's playing a floor tom, which is the big tom that goes down here, and he's actually got his foot up on it and he's manipulating it, creating all these sounds. That's the legacy we've got. So in his way, Baby Dots is a virtuoso, because I can't do that, right? When you go to a drummer like Joe Jones, who I do believe is perhaps the greatest drummer of the 20th century, when you watch him do a drum solo, it's so graceful, and he is pulling out a multiplicity of approaches out of the drums themselves, right? And it's all situated around the snare drum with the hi-hats coming in, but it's all snare drum related. The history of drumming, as the 20th century goes on, we see the development of tom-toms, of the bass drums, then double bass drums, more cymbals, more stuff goes on stage, especially with the rock drummers come in. Now, this is really coming out of the big band drums. The big band plays such a part in the development of rock music. And in the 1950s, Louis Bellson comes out with a much bigger kit. He's got 2 bass drums, and so the coordination goes up. By the time we get to the 60s, the backbeat emerges, and the groove changes. It goes to half-time, and it has a backbeat. So you have to understand, when Neil Peart joins Rush in 1974, the basic rock backbeat is perhaps 8 years old. So Neil Peart has grown up listening to the big band drummers. He's listened to Mitch Mitchell, Ginger Baker, Keith Moon. And that second generation, they take all of that, build it on all of that, and they start to do stuff with it. You can see it going on throughout the early 70s. And I always feel that with prog rock, with drummers like Bill Bruford, Barrymore Barlow and Clive Bunker and Jethro Tull, Carl Palmer, I'm probably missing out loads of these obvious drummers, but that second wave take what the 60s rock drummers have done, and they start to build upon it in a virtuoso way. And this is happening by the month. Kids are basically buying albums, because what you have here is a little bit like, it's still working because I just banged it. It's a little bit like, hang on, I've just got to go and plug this in. You wait there. Why is it not there we go. Edit that bit out, Andy. Where was I? A really good example of this is the fact that if you take Mount Everest, no one can climb Mount Everest. Is it possible even to climb Mount Everest? And then Sherpa Tenzing and Hillary, what's the name? They get up to the top of Mount Everest, and a few decades later, you got bloody Brian Blessed up there, you know, trying to keep quiet because he's got a loud voice, you know, and he only had to shout "Gordon's alive" once, and they would have been, you know, avalanche and all that bit. But my point is that it's easier to build on what someone's done before than to innovate. Now, I think that Barrymore Barlow pushed rock drumming so far in the early 70s. When he emerges on Thick as a Brick 72 and then Passion Play 73, he's using double bass drums in a certain way, and he's got a big kit. It's different. I think Carl Palmer's doing this to some extent, but I really feel that Barrymore Barlow was a great influence on Neil Peart, because Neil Peart takes that style, that very meaty style, very accurate panoramic style, and he builds upon it. So when he emerges, the techniques and approaches he's bringing into rock music, which is at this point is very, very young. So the rock drummers, none of them have the chops of the jazz drummers. And when the jazz drummers start to get into rock, and Tony Williams and Billy Common, and then Lenny White and Alphonse Mouzon, and then Steve Gadd, when the jazz guys start to come into rock, that tends to affect it as well. And I've always felt that Neil Peart, in some way, is influenced by Billy Cobham. Now, this stuff's coming out 72, 73. Neil's in there as a young man, bringing it into rock music in a very specific way. Okay, now what I'm not going to talk about on this video, because I've done it elsewhere, is talk about the fact that he also brought the direction of the band in, the lyrical content. He balanced the sort of silliness that you do have with Alex Lifeson and Geddy Lee to a certain extent. You know, I mean, some of those lyrics, especially the sort of cod, you know, chatting up girls rock lyrics on the first album seem very strange when you look at them now, because Neil Peart really provided so much more to that band. But most importantly, he was, you know, one of the magic parts in this sublime trinity, as I've described it, of rock. Russia really become at that point one of the greatest black bands on the planet, perhaps the greatest rock band of all time, and I think this is what we're seeing. So Neil Peart starts to build on it, and the fans go with him. And then there's the story of the fact that the labels want to kick him off. Why do they want to kick him off? Because they want to do what they want to do. So they come back with a sort of libertarian album, 2112, that says, you know, you can't tell us what to do. We'll do what we want to do. We've got free will. We'll do whatever we want to do. You can't stop us. We're going to do what we want to do. And it wins. It's a glorious story for self-expression. And I respond to that as a kid, creative kid who wants to be able to do what I want to do. And Rush is inspirational, right? So you start to go through the albums. Now, of course, I bought Moving Pictures. Then I went and bought, it was called The Archive, I think, or something like that, which was the first 3 albums. And I listened to those first 3 albums of the death. Then I bought 2112, and I worked my way back up to Moving Pictures. Then Signals came out in 1982. I'd done the whole lot, album by album. 2112 was one thing, but when you went to Farewell to Kings, it was as though Neil reached back to that early drumming, to the idea that he wasn't just a drummer, he was playing contraptions and creating all these sounds. And you put that album on and Xanadu comes out, and you hear this like filmic aspect, which is coming from the whole band, but it's coming from Neil as well. This is something that drummers have never really done before, and we can talk at length about Billy Cobham and Steve Gadd, but they sit there in the back playing the drums. Neil Peart started to do more, you know. So, you know, just before they go, and the men that hold high places must be the ones who start, you know, but just before that sings that, you hear, bow, down, 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 down. It sounds like church bells. And suddenly this band that are out in the bloody, I'd like to say English countryside, but it's a sort of Welsh-English border, at Rockfield, are sitting there, and you feel the church ringing out across the land. And when you listen to Close to the Heart, it's got the craftsman and the ploughman each much play their part. It's like they've gone back to a bloody old England, these Canadians have. And Neil Peart is painting that picture from the drum chair, right? Then Hemispheres comes out, and the possibilities of the power trio are perhaps pushed to the limit on that album. Even for them, the 80s are coming, new wave's coming in, and Neil Peart starts to move his drumming over to what I would call songwriter drumming. The songs start to become much, much stronger, right? They always wrote great songs, but the songs were tied up with this sort of progressive rock greatness. As the 80s come in, they know they need to draw it in. Not many progressive rock bands were able to draw it in. I think Neil was able to draw it in because he was so intensely involved in what the songs were about. And so he pulls this in. And when you get to Permanent Waves, for me, this becomes, it's like finishing school for drummers. If you want to know the way you can make drums interesting in a song, there's 2 drummers I feel you need to listen to. One's Stuart Copeland and one's Neil Peart. Now, Neil, at this point, he's pulled from Barrymore Barlow, but he's now pulling from Stuart Copeland. Okay? And he's starting to think, well, I can make this interesting, not just by playing in 7/8, but I can put the bass drum here, I could do this thing here. Now, me as a drummer, I was sat there unknowing, just because I thought it was really hard, learning his parts as a kid. Right? I honestly believe that if I just stuck with AC/DC and Motorhead, right, I don't think I'd have the chops I would have. It was like you love the music, It was presented to you. Your mates at school also had the albums. You would get kudos by being able to play YYZ or Tom Sawyer or La Villa Strangiata, which is all one of those things. You could have been in my school as a drummer. If someone had said, oh, Andy's a really good drummer. Was he really good? Yeah, he can play La Villa Strangiata. That would have meant that I'm like bloody Einstein of drums. So it wasn't just the fact that he was an incredible drummer. And technically, what he does is really amazing. And the Rush fans are right. At that moment in time, there isn't a rock drummer on the planet that's playing like that. Now, the jazz guys, that's all great, but they are in a commercial confine, right? They can't explore stuff. And when they do, it does become a hollow display of chops and speed. But Neil was never like that. His technique was always at the service of what was going on, the song or the drama, okay? I always think of, because I've maligned Neil Peart, and you can go, you know, he's stiff, you know, he sits right on top of the beat, he hasn't got a pocket, he's not funky like Steve Gadd. But actually, to play Rush's music is to play in a way which is methodical. So you have to become calm. You have to be cool. The way that a teacher would tell their student to play a drum rudiment, to not swing it, you know, not put it in the backbeat, but just sit there, quite cold. That way of playing, right? If you're playing Rush songs, the music will make you play like that. If you're playing Police songs, you're going to have to learn everything in front of the beat. Because it's like Stuart Copeland's got ADHD and he's determined in some mad competition with Sting to get to the end of the song before him. Beat you, Sting! It feels like that. You know, I'm gonna walk all over your song, watch, come on, you know, and they can't stop and they have to follow him. That's the feel. Feels in music teach students. Right? They teach you. And Neil Peart has got feel, but it's very cold and on the beat. When he's in the studio, you get the feeling that they will do a take and then he will go, no, because the calmness and coolness and collectedness that you need to play in that style means that everything has to be perfect. And I can remember when I first used to go into recording studios, and this used to trip me up, I would be playing with that mindset. And it was the mindset of Neil Peart, trying to find that perfect drum take. Then I learned that if I just play with loads of abandon and like thought, oh, sod it, I don't know what's coming up, but I'll just play through it anyway and see what happens. That approach created a better drum part for me, because I am what you call a hot drummer, which would be like Mitch Mitchell, Keith Moon. They're all hot drummers. Cool drummers would be like Gadd, Gavin Harrison. They're all cool drummers. Now, if you take the coolness of Steve Gadd and the coolness of Neil Peart and you put that together, you sort of get Gavin Harrison, right? And this is in my mind, drummers are like approaches. So when I think to Neil Peart in the pantheon of drummers, he to me is like, he's the one that when you get into him, your chops go through the roof. He's the one that turns you into a good drummer. Now, of course, by the 1980s, that influence is already starting to happen. Now, by the time we get to the end of the 80s, those bands like, you know, I don't know, Dream Theater, for example, or Spock's Beard, those bands that are in that realm. Dream Theater is a brilliant example. You know that Mike Portnoy is an absolute Neil Peart nut. He's ready to go and do that gig right now. He can eat it right now. He's ready to go. Because Neil Peart's chops are based upon the chops that are coming from Neil Peart. And I taught in the early 90s and saw that second generation where Dream Theater was like these kids' Rush. And so the drummers who were listening to Mike Portnoy, right, they developed into like the Matt Garsker. Now, Matt Garsker is the drummer for Animals as Leaders, and his chops are astonishing, but they stand on the shoulders of these giants. And Anika, right, she is an incredibly talented drummer. She starts at like 3 or 4 years old. She's had some sort of classical training. She's played tune percussion. We know this now because Rick Beato's been able to, nail who she is and where she comes from on that thing. That's just really important for us historians, that he does stuff like this. So I watched that the other day, and this is what got me thinking. I thought, Anika, when she's played on times, right? Now, where the hell do on times come from? Well, we can take it back to Dave Brubeck, we can take it back to Don Ellis, we can take it back to all the prog bands, the Mahavishnu Orchestra. It has a line, but Rush, right? Rush did things that are now standard, like overriding. Overriding is where you play 4 through something. So rather than going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that when I'm faced with the time signature, and it's in a song, and even if it's not in a song, I think I want people to feel this time signature. How can I make people feel and tap their foot to it? I'll do what Neil Peart does. I'll override my way through it, Neil Peart, he orchestrates his drums in a really logical way. So he will have something going on, and when he comes to the first fill, it will have like 3 hits. And the next one will have 4. And then 5. And then once he comes around that corner, then he's gonna upturn the fills. All this is the genius of Neil Peart. Absolute genius. And it required chops, and it required him developing these coordination skills. Right? And the thing that's interesting that no one has really said is that on these Rush concerts, I don't believe there has been a huge drum solo. There's been focused drum bits, but not like where the whole band walks off and then, Neil Peart's inside this bloody drum kit that's turning around, and then he's going through all these chapters of different things, and no drummer could do this. It's like he would tell a story on the drums. Now, I've knocked Neil Peart, and I've done it for a reason. I've done it because those Rush fans that are so hysterical, they're funny. And when you say he's not technically that great a drummer, they can't take it. But at the time he was. Technique has not got better. What's happened is it's changed. So when you look at someone like Anika Nilles, right? Where is her weakness technically compared to Neil Peart? Is there any? Well, there is, because she has not played stadiums before like this. She's done the Jeff Beck tour. That was probably close to it, and that was probably one of the reasons why they picked her, because she has done that tour. I have done clinics with all sorts of virtuoso drummers that are on the scene, but none of them actually played a big gig, and playing a big gig requires a certain set of skills. Neil Peart was the master of playing the big gig, absolute master of it, and being able to communicate on the drums in that way. And he wasn't the sort of drummer that threw his focus out of the drums, but it came out of the drums anyway. But your ability to throw your focus out into the room, Anika's got it in buckets. Part of it's just because she's just such a sort of classically cheekbone, angular woman, and that's a shock as well. That's another thing she's got going for her. So they're doing 2.5 hour gigs, and they are changing the set around. Anika will be struggling with this. To hold that amount of stuff in your memory, to go out and play it right every single night. Now, she's pulled it off, but we never questioned Neil pulling it off. We knew Neil would do that all day long. We knew Neil didn't need the other guys in the monitors. He didn't have the other guys in the monitors. He had himself in the monitors because he played it like it was a classical piece of music. And that drum part was set. Now, that's really difficult to do. I cannot do it. I'm an improviser. And Anika, having that jazz fusion background, I can see it in her as well. right? She's adhering to the feels, and everyone says she's putting her own thing on it. I tell you why she's putting her own thing on it, because to play those parts as Neil wrote them, like he played them, where every single thing was worked out, is unbelievably hard. When I went into the realm of progressive rock, I realised they play like that. It's a completely different approach. When I played in IQ, everybody was playing note for note what was on the record, except for me, because I couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. I'm a jazz guy. Now, when Neil came up against jazz fusion and jazz drummers on the Buddy Rich Day in New York, he suddenly realised where his weaknesses lie, and he went and got lessons with Freddie Studer, and I want to talk about this in a little bit more depth as well on here. I don't think they did him any good, right? Freddie Studer got him playing traditional grip. God knows why. He doesn't play traditional grip. Why do you want to start again for? What are you going to get from traditional grip? You know, absolutely nothing. He did a whole album playing traditional grip. I do not understand why he did this. I think Neil was a humble man. I think he went to see Freddie Studer. Freddie Studer was old school and said, if I'm going to teach you, go play traditional grip. Right? I don't believe that traditional grip is any greater or any worse than standard grip. Playing traditional grip will give you a different approach on the drums without a doubt. And it's wise to practice with traditional grip. But if you play match grip like Neil did and I do, why would you be changing it around on an album? Perhaps Neil really was looking for something different. Perhaps he got bored with the drums. Who knows? There's always things going on in people's minds. But I think the way he was taken through molar technique and that process, I think the molar technique is conducive to a much fatter rolling behind the beat approach. I mean, I'm molar technique to the cows come home. Drummers who played that super accurate way, you could liken a little bit more to sort of French timpani technique. Thumbs on top, match grip like this, that, and that sort of... Now, I want to watch his Neil Peart, all the drummers in us, when we watch it, he looks stiff, but it's not stiffness, it's what's required to pull off those fills. That's why they're hard. Now, Anika's technique is absolutely perfect. Part of this is because she's been taught, you know, from day one and had great drum teachers, but also because she's female and doesn't quite have the strength of a man, she has to have her technique perfectly down. I, as a younger man, played loud, fast and hard. My technique is loads better now because when I got to 40, my hands stopped working. Right, this is the Phil Collins things, right? You know, because I was hitting everything so hard and just doing it through brute strength. And that's a go through technique. So Anika's technique, if you really want to talk about actual hand technique, foot technique, is flawless. A lot of drummers from Neil's era and my era, they're not. We didn't have access to drum teachers. We didn't have access to education. We didn't learn to read when we were learning. We learned off records. And it was a different approach. And you took that and you created something out of it. And Neil Peart created something on the drums which is like vastly important. And what he did, as I'm trying to explain, is he created one of the launch pads, not the only launch pad. I think the whole bunch of drummers that came out of Jeff Porcaro at the same time, you know, he was around at about the same time, and their chops are based upon Jeff Porcaro. He never figured in with me. A brilliant drummer, I love Jeff Porcaro, but for me it was Neil Peart, and that created a base for me to play the way I do. Now, let's finish off now looking at what the hell's going on. Why are they cheering her? Why the Rush fans? The Rush fans want this to be the story. Oh, this girl's come in. You know, very pretty girl, you know, she's very good. She's an incredible drummer. She was playing with Jeff Beck before, and I like Jeff Beck. And she's, you know, they've worked so hard at it, and it's been very challenging to her, but she's pulled it off. It's quite incredible. It's such a major achievement. Yeah, but mate, you could get any session drummer and they could pull that gig off. Anyway, I could do it tomorrow. No, you could. You're being just arrogant. You couldn't just walk in and do that Rush gig. I honestly could. I could. And when I played in IQ, and I think the IQ stuff is as hard, if not harder, than a lot of the Rush stuff, right? I had one weekend's rehearsal. That's it. I had one weekend's rehearsal, 2 days of rehearsal with the band, then 4 weeks off, and then the next time I played with them, I might have had 2 weekend rehearsals, to be honest. So I had 4 days. I can't remember. It seemed like one day to me. She probably had about 2 months in the rehearsal room. I had to learn all that bloody thing. Last Human Gateway, bloody Harvest of Souls, 20-minute tracks, right? So I know what this is like to go through this. I really do. I think I'm in a good position to know it, but I did pull it off. I came up against the same thing. Because, again, I was more of a jazz fusion-based drummer. But I think Cookie, the drummer with IQ, he's also come from a jazz background, but I think it's more of a more traditional jazz background because he's a bit older than me. This is the whole point I'm trying to get. Generations of drummers have different approaches. Anika is the product of her time. There is a new wave of drummers coming in now who are playing in this sort of hyper tight, hip-hop-y, informed by people like Lewis Cole and J.D. Beck. Lots of fast little runs, and they're doing lots of fills between the floor tom and the snare drum. You see all this, and me at my age, I go, what the hell are they doing? I go, because it's about generations. It's about passing the baton on and then people doing stuff with it. And that's really what we've got with Anika. This isn't a technical issue, but what we do have is the incels. So, back in 1982, I was 14 years old. Rush come out with Signals, put the album on, and Subdivisions come on. And I'm going, that's me, that is. That's me. They're singing about me. Their music, I think it was unrock and roll because the kids that like it weren't the kids that wanted to sniff glue and smash stuff up. Right? They didn't want to be in a band travelling around chucking out TVs at the window. They wanted to go around hotels with a soldering iron, fixing any electrical, inconsistencies they found when they went into the room. It was a certain type of person. And I think as time went on, these people went on, and I know them. I remember the Rush fans at my school. They went on into very good jobs. They did very well. Once they'd got out of school and they weren't being measured on that sort of Subdivisions type of mindset, they found some nice lady to settle down with. They were monogamous. They not all of them, but I think they tended to, they grew up, got decent jobs, settled down, had kids, had daughters. And I can't help but feel that audience is not looking at Anika as the big usurper of Neil Peart. There will be some sad ones, but many of us are looking at her with fatherly eyes. Now, she is older than she looks. She's about 40, I think. I'm 58. I could just about be her dad. It's terrible, bloody hell. How can I be a dad of a 40-year-old? But that's the way it is. And so I feel it. I know that this is the gig of her life. And I want her to pull it off. I want her to nail it. She has nailed it. She is now going to go into the pantheon of great drummers. And at the moment, in the world, Anika Nilles is the most famous drummer on the planet right now. She's up there with Dave Grohl. She's up there with bloody Phil Collins and all the dead ones at the moment. And I hope that carries on. Where do we go here? How long can this paternalistic fatherliness go on for? Well, Rush, I have to be honest with them. They've not always made good decisions. But I think as a decision-making band, they are probably the most successful on the planet. I think dealing with the catastrophe that happened to Neil Peart in his private life, having to go through that, come back after that, and then find out that Neil was terminally ill and then manage that, is they have got very good at managing the legacy of Rush. And when I watched the live shows, I was sat there thinking, Rush have ended up being on this tour the greatest rock band of all time. And wouldn't we have loved to go back and see the 1980, 81, 82 Moving Pictures tour? That's the classic tour, exit stage left. But if you go watch that show, it's great. But what you're seeing now, Rush were made for these modern stage shows. If you go and see Beyonce or Billie Eilish, you're going to see, you're not watching a band, you're watching bloody projections and lights and all that. The band doesn't matter. But with Rush, the three of them, and they've been very clever with the keyboards, they give him a few solo spots, but he's just not there. I can't even remember his name. But the three of them, with the very blonde, very cheekbone, iconic Anika in the middle, and you can see through the kit to her, and you see the three of them inside this huge circus of lights and projections. It's absolutely incredible. Last night I was watching them over and over again. I watched the two shows where they do 2112. I think I watched it 3 times because there's a false start. I had to watch that as well. But it's just unbelievable. It's absolutely incredible. So I think that Rush have handled this brilliant. Now, at some point, when Geddy's voice packs in, which I think it's close to, what happens next? If Alex wants to go out again, do they pull somebody else in? Another girl, perhaps? Because girls have high voices. They'll be able to sing all the funny stuff. Imagine if they pulled another girl. Would that work again? Some bass virtuoso, bloody, you know. And then when Alex finally has to, you know, call it a day, they can get another girl in. And Rush would have gone from being the ultimate boys incel band to this all-girl legacy band, going round, spreading rock to everybody. And maybe the girls will then go through looking at these incredible musicians and being inspired by them to pick up the instrument and play, because that's what Rush did for me. You know, I have never, most of the jazz musicians I meet, right, especially the fusion-y ones, they all started with Rush. So I've tried to explain what's going on here. We can actually go, Anika's a way better technical drummer than Neil Peart, right? Because that's the way things are, okay? In 2000, I was out doing drum clinics. I was playing with Simon Phillips. And at that point in time, my chops were at a level where the companies felt that they could put me out in front of drummers. And I played alongside Billy Cobham, I played alongside Thomas Lang, Simon Phillips, Terry Bozzio, Jimmy Chamberlain. And I was there in that. And I was able to go out into a room full of drummers and impress them with my chops. All right? Now I can't believe impress my own kids, because they go online and go, look what this kid's doing. He's only 8 years old. He's doing the Black Page, but he's doing it, you know, just with just his feet. All right, then, I give up. This is the nature of it. The technique has gone through the roof. It's no comment against Neil. Neil Peart in 1981 was perhaps the greatest rock drummer on the planet, technically, in terms of what they were doing on record. Right? I'm sure there were drummers that could also do it, but they weren't delivering it on record. Back then you had to be able to deliver it on a record, and there was a whole bunch of ducks that had to be in a row. Now, because of the internet, which means people have got more access to how you do things, but also there's a wider net that can be cast. You know, if you're a great drummer now, you don't have to like try and get in a band, get a record deal, go around the whole world, sell 1 million records for people to have to see you play. You could just put something up on Instagram. This is what's changed it. This is the way it is, okay? The ability to play like Neil in 1981 required perhaps more work than these kids around that can just play him through the floor. What he did was to push the Overton window forward. And technically, that is so hard to do. It's unbelievably hard. And when you play the drums or an instrument and you're faced with that as a challenge, then you realise that's where true genius lies. Neil was a genius on the drums. And I think this is a great celebration of his legacy. Anika is a greater technical drummer, a more skillful drummer, but she is not Neil Peart, because only Neil Peart was Neil Peart. Thank you.